Yes.
Yes.
And here I am talking about violence against children in the Eastern Caribbean area. And before I start, I just want to paint a picture of the area we're talking about. For us, Eastern Caribbean area, it consists of 12 islands, 8 independent states, and 4 United Kingdom overseas territories. So Montserrat and Anguilla, British Virgin Islands, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, those are the UK overseas territories. And then we have 8 other independent territories. And together is a collective population of about 2.3 million, of which 26% are children. And just 50.7% of these are boys, and the others are girls. When we're talking about violence against children in the Eastern Caribbean area, we're seeing 3 main forms. Well, for us, violence against children is a human rights violation, as confirmed by Article 19 of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. And we know that all the countries of the United Nations have ratified this convention, except for one, the USA. But in spite of these and other international treaties that protect children's rights, violence against children remains widespread, albeit to varying degrees in our neck of the woods and in every country, irrespective of people's geographical origin or social strata. So I'm going to do a quick walk. I've been asked only to be on the stage for 10 minutes. So a quick walk through the 3 main forms that we are seeing from the evidence that we have: sexual violence against girls and boys, corporal punishment and physical punishment, I should say, and pair-on-pair bullying. Those are the 3 main forms that we are seeing in this area. So let's look at sexual violence. Of the 260 reported cases in a year in Eastern Caribbean area, and these were only 7 of the 12 countries, this represented about 35% of the categories of all reports. So taking all the cases across the countries, sexual abuse of children is the largest number of reported cases. However, in individual countries, this may vary from country to country, because in some countries, the physical abuse of children, or the reported physical abuse of children, is the largest category. And of the cases for child sexual abuse, we also run opinion polls. We've been running these from 2014, so we have this over a period of time. And right now, the last social service report, survey report run in 2019, told us that across the region, 61% of the population would report an incident of suspected sexual abuse of children. And of these, 27% would go further and actually seek help for the particular child. But there's also that 39% that would not report. And of these, 60% believe it is not their business to do so, or they fear the negative consequences that may come with reporting, the fact that they may have to take time away from work to go to the courts, etc., or simple embarrassment of stepping forward. So these are areas that we have to work on, because there's no country in the world that condones sexual violence of children. And most people, when in a public forum, would say, of course, I would do something. But yet we're seeing, that there is a significant number of our populations who would not take action. We do know, however, that child sexual abuse occurs within the circle of trust. Stranger abuse of children sexually is extremely rare in the Eastern Caribbean area. It occurs in places that should be havens for children, such as homes, schools, and residential centers, the circle of trust, as well as churches. So let's go now to the physical abuse, and lots of it shows up in the category of violent discipline of children. From our population-based multi-indicator cluster surveys done in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and St. Lucia, 70% of children across those countries have experienced some form of violence as a means of discipline. 5 out of 10 children experienced physical punishment, and 6 out of 10 experienced psychological aggression that went along with that physical discipline. And only a quarter of caretakers in Trinidad and Tobago and in St. Lucia, and a third in Barbados, actually believe that a child needs to be physically punished to be disciplined. And so we're seeing a little variance about what people say they believe and then what children are reporting are practices against them. Again, it's things that we have to work on in terms of parents, as well as we said, others, teachers and others, about how we can more positively discipline our children. On average, more persons in the Eastern Caribbean area countries and territories support the banning of corporal punishment in schools, 44%. And when we started doing these surveys, it was as low as 20%. So it is improving that more people support the banning of corporal punishment in schools, as compared though to those who would ban it in homes. It's remaining at a very low 22%. People feel that they should have the autonomy of their own children, whereas they're not as forgiving of the education sector in continuing to use corporal punishment against children. And we've been seeing that governments are becoming more proactive in the banning of the use of corporal punishment as a sentence for those children in conflict with the law more than any other sector. So when we look at the banning of corporal punishment, and this is the legal status of corporal punishment in our countries. And I want to caution our audience, for some countries, they may not be using it, or they may have been forbidden by policy. But when you look at their actual law, there may be still some archaic laws that still persist that someone could use to argue the use. So we're looking at this in relation to the actual law, what it says. And when we look at column 6 for sentencing, most countries where you see yes, that means it has been abolished. Where you now see no in an orange, that is basically saying that there are movements towards that process. So for example, Barbados has a Child Justice Bill 2019 that if it's passed as it now stands, it will abolish the possibility of a magistrate or judge ordering a sentence of whipping on a child. No country to date has banned it within the home. As I said, opinion polls show us that that has lowest category of support. We do have some in schools. We do have some positive noises about moving towards its abolition in schools, etc. But for us, this persistence in really approving recurrent forms of violence against children in the form of corporal punishment, we find that in the year 2020 is something that states need to really reflect on and interrogate. Pair-on-pair bullying. We are seeing that 1 in 4 secondary school children in the Eastern Caribbean area has experienced bullying at least on one day during the past month. And the rates range from 13% in Barbados to a high of 30% in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And bullying by sex, girls or boys, is really a mixed pattern across the Eastern Caribbean area. But we've seen that 25% of children have been harassed and 38.5% have been in physical fights or have been physically attacked. And this is something that we really need to work on. And coming into play is the whole idea of cyberbullying. We've seen this becoming more and more prevalent, and in the COVID-19 context, where more of our exchanges are now online, we are sure that in the next surveys that are perhaps run with children, we will see a significant increase in this form of bullying in the peer-to-peer category. If we do a short little gender analysis on this violence against children, what do we see? Is that 90% of the sexual abuse victims were girls, particularly in the age group 12 to 16. And for some national child protection agencies, their data is telling us that some forms of this is forced, but also there are some children, especially in the adolescent stage between 14 and 16, who will tell you that they consented, although it is not legally possible with their boyfriends. And so, more education around um, agency of self we need to do across the Caribbean. Virtually all the perpetrators that are being reported were male and known to victims, and around two-thirds were the victim's boyfriend or a family member. Victims of child neglect and physical emotional abuse is rather evenly split across the 12 countries between girls and boys. And in this category, though, 80% of the alleged perpetrators were mothers, nearly all of whom are single mothers, and over half were unemployed. And so the stresses of living in single parent households without the support of their male partners is largely driving this aggression in the parenting styles. A study out of IDB recently published shows that almost all male inmates in Barbados reported receiving corporal punishment as children, and slightly more than half witnessed violence against their mothers. um, Clearly showing us that this violence is a learned behavior. And so, while lots of people may try to defend the practice of corporal punishment as simply something that's been handed down and for them effective in child rearing, we need to see that we need to become more positive and move away from this power over our little people and look to more ways in which we can be constructive in raising our children, because it's having consequences that are perhaps unintended in our societies. A UNESCO study 2018 found that boys were more likely to be involved in the physical fights. This is where we're talking about the peer-on-peer bullying, while girls are suffering more from the cyberbullying. Um, So this is something again that we need to look at. As I said before, it's growing exponentially and one that generates a lot of concern. I want to end with a call to action for governments to really record and review the kinds of violence being faced by girls and boys. To look at their sites of violence, you're talking about in the homes, in schools, even in churches and communities, and let's work together to try to find solutions. We have to look at the perpetrators. Who are the main perpetrators in which areas? And try to work and support them. To recognize the link between violence against women and violence against girls and boys, and also to acknowledge the link between men involved in crime and its links to violence against girls and boys, and the possibility that they too can perpetuate this cycle of violence. UNICEF has been supporting countries in the Eastern Caribbean area to address various forms of violence against children through standard setting. We work a lot in legislative reform, policy reform, um, protocols for various professional groupings and sectors, capacity building, awareness raising activities, and we remain committed to supporting countries in this region to end all forms of violence against children. Thank you very much. Over to you,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather. A really interesting presentation. I think that some of the data that you provided, it's really very useful to make some academic-based and science-based policies to act in the specific problematics that the children and adolescents are having. And so we thank you very much for this approach and for this information that you provided. I want to highlight what you said regarding that in Barbados, almost all of the men that are inmates of the jail system were victims of corporal punishment during childhood. So this is a very specific data that provides us with important tools to lobby to end all forms of corporal punishment. The work that it needs to be done within families, it's a very specific information that we really need to use. The other thing I want to highlight is the need to have gender-based public policies. So mothers are able to provide their children with all their needs to make them access the right system. So they are able to grow up and to stop the neglection of children and adolescents. And lastly, I really want to thank you for the call for action that you provided for governments. We definitely are taking note on that to work with the member states, and specifically what you said regarding the standard setting, which it's a point to go on and a very starting point to get through all the countries, so they may have a baseline to work up on the protection of children and adolescents' human rights. Thank you very much. I want to remind all the participants that you're able to make questions through the chat or through the question and answer tool that you will find in the lower part of your screen. And I want to welcome Sherwin. Sorry, Sherwin, I'm not able to pronounce your last name. Very, very sorry for that.
Thank you, Anna. I'm glad I finally made it.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sherwin. We will continue with your presentation. Sherwin is a program manager of the criminal public, sorry, I have to go back. He is a program manager for the security, criminal and protection from the secretariat CARICOM. I hope I had that right, Sherwin, I'm sorry. You have the floor.
Thank you, Anna. Just let me bring the presentation up. I had some issues with IT earlier on. Hopefully all is resolved. So let me just bring up the presentation now.
Is everything all right, Sherwin?
Yep,
You need assistance?
It's just taking its time to open.
Okay.
It's open now. Slideshow. Beginning. There we go. It's just the system is a little bit sluggish, but can you guys see can you see anything?
Not yet, we are seeing you.
Share screen.
It's the green button at the bottom of the screen.
There.
All right.
Can you
Okay, yes, we have it.
Ah, beautiful. Right, good. Good morning, everyone. I know there might have been a slight delay waiting for my IT situation to kick back in, so I'll get straight into it. You can see most of what I'm about to present would be the recommendations or prescriptions falling out of some recent work that we did within selected schools and communities within the CARICOM region that looked at building on the crime prevention and mitigating activities that we had started from our crime and prevention social development action plan. The study itself sought to build resilience in communities as a way to avert violence and to also map what was some of the prescriptions, some of the risk factors within those communities. It involved focus groups and surveys. I won't spend a lot of time on that because I really want to get to where we are at in terms of the recommendations. On this slide, you can really see a lot of what informed the study. First, we have the CARICOM Crime and Security Convergence Framework, which is really a collection of all the strategic plans in the region where youth and youth violence are a factor. We, of course, were guided by community needs and priorities. We looked at, in particular, mandates coming down from the various CARICOM heads of government that instructed the CARICOM secretariat to undergo some of these studies and to deal with the scourge of violence among our youth in particular. We also have been aligned to the rights of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. I know I'm not speaking to a uninformed audience, but just a look at the alignment. And of course, the model strategies for the Economic and Social Council's resolutions of the 16th of July, 2014. The specific objective of the project itself was to build the capacity of primary school teachers and counselors for evidence-based interventions to address crime and violence in primary schools through data collection, analysis, and designing and implementing relevant crime and violence prevention and mitigating strategies. It is similar for the communities where we sought to build the capacity of community leaders for evidence-based interventions to address these same crime and violence in communities through data collection, analysis, and designing and implementing relevant crime and violence prevention and mitigating strategies. I want to spend a little time talking about how we interrogated the risk, threat, and protective factors in the schools and the communities. For the schools, risk was defined as a factor that as an attribute or exposure of young persons that increases the likelihood of them participating in gang and violent related activities or demonstrating antisocial behavior. And of course, some of the subscales that we interrogated were whether or not they knew reasons for joining gang or whether or not they had even known gang members themselves. The threat factors were defined as any factor present that exposes young persons to a higher risk of being harmed or injured. And here we interrogated exposure of violence within the homes, exposure to gang violence in the school, and exposure and easy access to drugs, which is one of the facilitating factors. Protective factors for the schools were defined as those conditions or attributes in individuals, families, or schools that helped to mitigate or eliminate risk, thereby increasing the health and well-being of young persons and family. And of course, we looked at school social capital, whether or not the school provided a safe environment for young persons to engage, and whether or not their families interacted directly with the schools to build on that capacity. And of course, we looked at whether or not, or we interrogated how much or how little those young persons were involved in actual school activities. Switching across to the communities, for the communities, a risk factor was defined as an attribute or exposure of young persons that increase the likelihood of them participating in gang and violent related activities or demonstrating antisocial behavior. So we wanted to find out whether they knew any gang members, if they themselves had joined any gang or actually seen any kind of gang activities. The threat factors within the communities were defined as any factor present that exposed our young persons to a higher risk of being harmed or injured. Domestic violence within the home, exposure to gang violence in the communities were some of the considerations that we took into place. And of course, for communities, the protective factors were defined as those conditions or attributes in individuals, families, or communities that help to mitigate or eliminate risk, thereby increasing the health and well-being of young persons and their families. So you see, it was a very comprehensive study that was done, and we selected representative communities and representative countries that we could have used to generalize for the rest of the CARICOM region. Right. Having gone through all of that, I just want to get straight into what we had found and what were some of the recommendations for alleviating those issues. There's several issues depending on whether they were schools, communities, and I'll separate those two. And from country to country, there were slight variations, but generally these were the most issues that kept surfacing over and over again. We had unstable families and adverse environments in homes as one of the key issues. And some of these prescriptions that were designed coming out of the study, coming out of the focus group training, which involved skilled persons involved in the various ministries that supported crime and security and practitioners in the field and university scholars. So some of the recommendations coming out of that, and surprise, surprise, a lot of these I think we've been hearing again and again, but for us, this study sort of cemented a lot of those issues. Enhanced parental training and classes, because parenting itself was an issue within the member states for the study that we decided. There was increased parental monitoring of children in relation to the proper use of technology and the social media. So it's not that we're saying, because you know that the rhetoric is that a lot of young persons are exposed to a lot of violent and antisocial types of behaviors and concepts on social media. And there have actually been moves for them to actually ban the use of cell phones and all of those things within schools and the school environment. But what the study did show is that it's okay for young persons to have that because it's how they communicate. What we just need to do is to monitor the proper use, and we can even use their affiliation for technology as a positive in terms of how we address their own learning and some of their learning preferences. Under this particular example, there was also a recommendation for family counseling services and providing for homes for the targeted schools. Now, the study itself was pretty comprehensive. We pulled the population from the school, like the students themselves that were surveyed. But we were also able to triangulate a lot of the data through going into the same communities that the schools came from, like I alluded to earlier, but also to interview where was possible and to bring in the parents of the children themselves that were interviewed to validate the kinds of responses that we were getting from the students. And so this is how we were able to triangulate that information. There were a lot more recommendations under this specific issue, but time is limited. But I can share a lot of those separate and apart from this presentation that we're going into. Another critical issue was an inadequate learning environment with teaching methods and techniques and social services at schools. You could understand that how important these are, and some of the recommendations coming through were implementation of measures and practices to monitor and evaluate the performance of principals and school administrators. Not that we think that we have a crop of really horrible administrators, but the fact that when you're evaluating the progress of students, the success of students, it's important to look at all the environment and all that was influencing their performance. A school of, a class of students that were preparing, failing in a particular area might not have been necessarily the result of the children themselves, but it could have been a result of a challenge or deficiency by the educator. So we needed to make sure that those things were taken into consideration. There was also a call for a greater career program in primary schools in particular to encourage students to embrace and understand that they are valuable to the future development of the nation. That speaks for itself. And of course, really, really strong recommendations came through for mentoring programs to facilitate the holistic development of students. And a lot of these involved peer-to-peer mentorship for our students. Right, so you can see some more of those recommendations here. I won't go too deeply into them. I'll be sharing this presentation after. We also flagged the establishment, and this is a big one, of affirmative after-school programs and skills training to combat and deter members joining gang. What this did, and we were able actually to pilot some activities under this specific recommendation last year through our 10th EDF programming with the establishment of clubs in schools. And we found that it was a really good environment to build because you have students coming in together to be able to share outside of the classroom. And they also got a chance to zero in on what was some of their strengths and to be able to use that particular strength to develop other areas of weakness. Another huge issue within schools that we found was insecure school environments, resulting in gang violence, peer pressure, and bullying, and overall low performance of students. And again here, monitoring was key through enforcement of school appropriate guidelines and rules, getting the stakeholders that surround the children, the parents, the teachers, even persons that they were interacting with in the community, to sit and meet to discuss what were the, those things that reflected in poor student behavior. And of course, there's still a call for facilitation of more special education teachers within schools themselves. All right, and the other recommendations here are listed. Like I said, I'm sharing this, so I wouldn't really go into this, but I'm just picking out those that at this moment were really, really resonating with the study. Right? Again, indiscipline in schools as an issue reflected in gang violence in the school, peer pressure and bullying, and the lack of focus of academic work was a key issue in what caused children at that age not to perform and then facilitated their involvement in risk-taking behaviors. Again, there was the development and enforcement of relevant policies to handle indiscipline in schools. So for the communities, we found that there were similar types of issues. And there was one really big issue that overarched all. Now, I want to say that even though I am pointing out some of those prescriptions under these specific issues, a lot of the recommendations or prescriptions would fit in more than one particular issue. So it's not like the only thing that you can do to deal with unstable families is X, Y, and Z. But a sort of comprehensive approach when you looked at the information that came out through schools and communities in terms of how we go about ensuring a safe school environment, a safe community environment, getting the community members involved actually in that whole concept of, it takes a village to raise a child. Those are still very, very relevant issues in dealing with violent behavior. And of course, under unstable families, this particular issue that you see in front of you, a strong point was the career and personal and professional development classes for parents and caregivers. All right. Another key issue was to provide employment opportunities for persons to earn an honest living. And of course, we're talking here about not only the traditional types of subjects that, in particular, the Caribbean region leans towards, but some of those other entrepreneurial types of activities that could provide those young entrepreneurs with the capacity, even at that age, to decide where they want to go in life. It wasn't too early to make those kinds of life decisions. It's only when they really felt that they were trapped and that their choices were limited that they found that deviance started to step in. We found that the police, health, and social welfare officers should be more visible in the respective communities and to provide relevant information to members on legal, health, and negative consequences of indulging in violent antisocial behavior. And this also speaks to the great value there is in not just, like, for instance, if we're dealing with crime and, it's not just ministries of national security, but there are a lot of other ministries that contribute: Ministry of Youth, Education, Social Development, Health, that once we can get the relevant persons to sit down and discuss and look at the development of our children as a holistic kind, of approach, then we would have much less incidents of violence and we'd be able to turn back the tide on some of what we've been experiencing now. Right, so I know I've gone through those really quickly, but like I said, I'm going to share this, and I just want to quickly talk about where do we go next. The study that I discussed greatly followed some of the recommendations coming out of the model strategies that I alluded to early on, where we looked at prohibition of violence against children and general prevention, and this included children in schools, institutions of learning in particular. But there are other areas where it is highly recommended that we work with and seek partnership with in order to close those gaps to provide our children in particular with a brighter future. The thematic area of preventing and responding to violence against children within the justice system itself is critical, and also dealing with the capacity of the justice system to respond to violence against children is another critical issue in terms of closing gaps. Right? And we see this taking place at several levels, as you can see in the little block diagram I have here. We need to continue making inroads in the legislative environment to be able to create the kinds of laws that would create the kind of environment to allow the kind of collaboration that I've been discussing throughout the presentation in terms of where health insert itself within this whole situation. How would we be able to deal with policy? What is the value of training? And of course, monitoring and evaluation is a critical factor, because whatever we start out, we must be able to monitor and evaluate so that we can check our progress as we go and to be able to make course corrections. For all of this to happen, and you'll see these two highlighted in very bold colors, and in particular, I want to center you on the middle block in the last row, data. Data collection needs to be significantly improved, and we've made a lot of strides within the region, but still there doesn't exist at a regional level a mechanism to collect the kind of data specific to children and adolescents that are involved in violence, and to be able to make projections as to how we would mitigate those kinds of figures. And another big discussion that we need to have is how much this is going to cost, what can we do early on, who is going to pay for what. Those are a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of moving forward. We've made great strides so far, but there's a lot that's left to be done so that we can tighten that network. And I just want to signal, gratitude for your reaching out to us, because really and truly, this is a problem that is going to involve as many stakeholders as possible. And the end result can only be a greater quality of life for the citizens of this region, and by best practice, any other region that integrates directly with the CARICOM region. And of course, that as note, I would like to end there that we need to continue to work hand in hand to ensure that these deliverables are met. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Sherwin. This was a very interesting approach. And I would like to highlight some things that I think are crucial for our understanding and our work with the appropriate policies and programs to eradicate violence against children. One of them is, again, we hear that the exposure to violence is one of the main issues that keeps children and adolescents repeating and copying these role models. As Heather was saying, most of the people that is violent or has violent behavior, it's because he or she has been exposed to violence in early days of their lives. And also something else that I think it's really important for all the people and organizations that are working towards the eradication of violence is to have comprehensive and holistic approach to the programs and policies that are being implemented, the work that has to be done within schools, family, and communities. It's crucial for what we are seeing. And obviously, how the evidence-based construction of policies and programs are the ones that are actually having the best results and are being the best practices over the region. And also, I recall the work with families, which is part of this comprehensive approach. And the last thing, but not the less important, what you say regarding the budget. This is something that the Committee on the Rights of the Child has been working for quite a time now, and also the United Nations Special Representative on Violence Against Children has also been highlighting the importance of providing budget for all the policies and programs regarding the work with children and the work to eradicate violence against children. So thank you very, very much for this presentation. And as you said, the multisectoral and the intersectoral work are basic to work on this issue. And obviously the work between the organizations that are working in the issue as well. So many thanks for your presentation and all the information provided. The space for questions and answers will be carried out at the end of the presentations. We still have one to go. So please keep providing your questions through the chat and through the question and answer tool. We want to also welcome and thank the people that are following us live in Facebook. Thank you very much for your interest, and please also know that you can share your questions and comments by Facebook, and we can read them at the end of the webinar. So I give the floor to Ms. Carol Daniel, President of the NGO Caribbean Development Foundation. Carol, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Now, my presentation deviates from the theme of violence, and it really looks at the closure of schools and the progress of online schooling as a result of the COVID-19. First of all, I want to say I think praise is due to our regional governments for the rollout of the COVID-19 response in the region. As the saying goes, I believe they have hit the ground running. Here in Trinidad, where I'm based, I was impressed with the swiftness of the move from face-to-face schooling to online learning. However, COVID-19 has exposed some of the deeper social issues within our society that existed prior to the pandemic. The inequality of our education system has been exposed by COVID-19. In the region, we all have denominational schools, which basically are the prestige schools in our region. For example, in Trinidad, it's bishops and convent. In Barbados, it's Harrison's College and Queen's College. And then, of course, we have the government schools. Despite the fact that the curriculum is generally the same for all schools, it would seem that the difference between the prestige schools and the government schools is to be found in the deliverance of the academic curriculum. The dropout rate at the prestige schools is much lower than that of the government schools. The prestige schools tend to attract more qualified teachers. They even attract the brighter students, in that because of our system where at the SEA exam, the common entrance exam, you choose the school of your choice, your first choice, second choice, and you get to go to the school depending on your marks. Naturally, the prestige schools would be at the top of the list. Now, in Trinidad, despite the fact that the denominational schools do receive government funding, assistance, there is something called the 20% rule, which allows denominational prestige schools to choose 20% of the intake of their students based on religious affiliation. The journalist George Allen once referred to this system, which really started in the 1960s, as a mechanism for discrimination based on a mixture of religion and privilege. With the issue of COVID-19 and the subsequent launch of online schooling, the rollout of our online program has raised a few challenges and once again exposed the inequities in our society. There is the obvious fact that as many as 60,000 students in our country, or even more, have no access to internet. Teachers have found as many as half the class without internet access, and therefore they have found themselves using the mobile device, WhatsApp groups, and personal phone calls to reach out to students and include them in the academic material. There's, apart from the lack of internet access, which there is a scientific term for the lack of internet access, socio-spatial inequities. It's quite a term for a dinosaur like myself when it comes to the technology. There is also the lack of digital literacy among many. To carry on an education program that is online, both the teacher and the student need to be digitally competent. Teachers are at this time receiving emergency training via online workshops and tutorials. Now, COVID-19 is not entirely responsible for this shift from face-to-face education to the online platform. Prior to COVID-19, the governments of Trinidad and Tobago and some other CARICOM states had been working to incorporate a digital platform into the education system by 2020. However, the Minister of Education in Trinidad and Tobago in June 2019 indicated to the CARICOM Council of Examinations that Trinidad would not be ready for the shift in 2020 and instead projected a date to 2021. However, with the emergence of COVID-19, the shift to online teaching, learning, and assessment had to be urgently implemented, and the program had to be rolled out in the short term. So for those of us over 35, there has always been the sense that the millennium generation was naturally given to the digital technology, and that the move to online learning would be unencumbered where this generation was concerned. It has been reported that in Trinidad, we have an internet penetration of 77.3% of the population. Now on paper, this sounds fine. And you think, well, we have arrived at the age of technology. However, in our attempts to shift the education system to the digital platform, it is clear that we have certain vulnerabilities and inequities which we must address for large portions of our population the young generation will be left behind. Special programs must be put in place for students with learning impairments. The digital platform must be made user-friendly for this group. Thus far, many parents have complained that there are no provisions for students with learning impairments. In fact, parents have complained that in general, the platform is not user-friendly enough for children to really navigate. The irony of the situation is, with the shift to digital platform, our education system is presented with a unique opportunity to end decades of inequity and discrimination in our education system. Once the kinks in the system are worked out, the online platform can be of benefit to all. All students can have access to the same quality of academics. It is in the country's best interest now for the laptop in schools program to be reintroduced. Many have questioned the benefits of this program, and they have said that it did not improve the digital literacy in our schools, and even it did not create a digital mode of learning. However, with the shift to online learning, the laptops in school program is now urgently needed to give all children a chance to a quality education. The thing about it is, going forward, we need to ensure that all children have access to the internet. So the laptop in schools, that is the first step. The government could perhaps initiate a program of 100% internet access. They can probably call the program No Child Left Behind. They need to invest in ensuring that children all over this country, in Port of Spain, in Caroni, Caripachaima, they all have access to the internet if education is going to be online. I think the government also needs to roll out a program that monitors children. There is no doubt that the online method of learning is going to isolate children further. And we know that when children are isolated from the rest of the world, they are vulnerable to physical violence and sexual violence. We need a decentralized program where in each county there is a unit responsible for monitoring the children, making home visits, ensuring that those children are safe and complying with all the programs, the educational programs, and that they are in fact attending the online sessions. We need a unit in each county to be able to do that kind of monitoring. The thing is, this is the new norm, because as I've said, prior to COVID-19, we were experimenting with moving the education to an online platform. I attended a conference in 2017 in Bolivia, put on by the IADB. And the conference was called The Future of Work in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the thing is, at that conference, they spoke of online education, working from home, reorganizing the labor force, looking at labor contracts where you worked from home 90% of the time. They even talked about robotics. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this is, nothing but a pipe dream, because in my ignorance, and I have to admit the technology is not my strong suit, I thought to myself, this isn't going to happen in the English-speaking Caribbean. This is, way down the road, perhaps after I leave the planet. And then about a year later, I was in St. Lucia working on a project and came across the information that robotics was being taught in schools, primary schools, and it was being funded by the IADB. And I thought, perhaps this is not as much of a pipe dream as I thought. And then here we are now with COVID-19, and almost everything said at that workshop in Bolivia has come to pass. And so I think the era of us being face-to-face, very personable people interacting with each other, that may be a thing of the past, and online work and school may be the future. So it seems the future is here and now, and we have got to prepare our children for the future, because children are entitled, as far as I'm concerned, it is a right to have good quality education. And as I've said, the online platform is providing us with a unique opportunity to end decades of discrimination in our education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Definitely also a very accurate approach on the gaps and on the inequity that we still have in the region. I would like to highlight something that Sherwin also shared with us, which is that we have to create the environments and the options for children and adolescents to feel they have a future. This is something that was crucial in the making of the monitoring and all the issues that were presented before. If children and adolescents do not feel that they have a future, then it's really difficult to make a way for them to exercise their rights and to end violence against them. Also, what you said, that COVID-19 is not the responsible for what we are seeing in relation to the lack of digital literacy, the lack of access to internet connection. This was something that was happening before. And this is a very interesting approach, because most of children and adolescents that do not have access to the internet are not exercising the right to education, which puts them in a very vulnerable position to be victims of sexual and physical violence. So many thanks for bringing this up. This is something that needs to be discussed widely. And this would end our presentation this morning. We will open the floor for questions and answers. And we already have a couple of questions. I will raise them to you. Please, this is for Heather. How does UNICEF Eastern Caribbean articulate its work with state governments?
Thank you very much, Anna, and participants. The UNICEF, any UNICEF office will have a program of cooperation signed between themselves and the particular government. For us, we may be a little different from countries that serve only one country. We have a program of cooperation with the 12 member states. And within this program of cooperation, which runs every 5 years, a 5-year cycle, so 2017 to 2021, violence against children is one of the priority themes that we are committed to working with your governments. So anything, as I said, from legislation to capacity building to awareness raising, all governments or civil society organizations in those countries need do is to approach us to see how we can partner with them to try to reverse this particular phenomena. It's a very easy mechanism. We try to work in an intersectoral way. So for example, we've been working with the OECS Commission on a number of years with model bills. And we are trying now to get every country to review, they can adapt and enact. And in one instance, for example, and where we're seeing a lot of the progress, it's the juvenile justice system, child justice. And we've seen that most governments now have either enacted or are moving towards that, where they have removed corporal punishment as a form of whipping, where they now provide for more diversion, community-based rehabilitation of children, recognizing that childhood is a very special stage of life, and that perhaps some of the challenges that they've had Some of it may be just developmental, that with support they can overcome. So rather than going to custodial means, we're working for elimination of corporal punishment in all settings, which may be a harder fight, but we will never give up. And in that context, someone, I think Adele Williams, I had seen earlier in the chat, had asked about training against violence against children. UNICEF has a flagship program, which is managed by our lifelong learning section. And this is working with the education system to build what we call child-friendly schools. It may go by different names in different countries. Positive behavioral management, where you're trying to work with all of the stakeholders within the education system to develop schools that are child-friendly, schools where children need not fear to go, schools in which bullying should be eliminated, that everybody's aware and on board. And this has a number of strands of activities. We're seeing that schools in and of themselves, depending on the leadership is one of those critical factors in determining how that particular operation is run, what will be tolerated and what is not tolerated. So leadership training is one aspect of it. Capacity building for the teachers themselves, but also children themselves, how they are integrated in the management and running of the schools. When children have a stake in something, their participation and it's valued, they too are active citizens. It's preparing them for life. So this program is available. It's in all countries. And if you're interested there, you just need to contact your particular Ministry of Education or UNICEF generally. Then the linkages with the social sector. So all the countries, again, have laws against, child abuse, child sexual abuse. But then how do we enforce these? So one of the things we're trying to get is every country to have an actual protocol for the reporting and management of child sexual abuse. So a report is given to a teacher. What happens next? How is this referred to the people who can best manage the particular situation? So it's all connected. The health. So you go to the health sector. If a doctor recognizes that this child has been sexually violated, does he just treat the symptoms? No, there are other steps to be taken. Then how does the law respond to it? Is it too long? Is it cumbersome? What are the kinds of evidence that needs to be taken? Are the swabs available? How is the evidence kept? So all of the different areas, I think Sherwin's study pointed out that you will be having to touch every single sector to be able to respond to the interests of these children. And that's what UNICEF is about. And countries just need to approach us if support is required in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. There's another question for Sherwin and Heather. Do you identify child participation programs in the Caribbean?
Thank you. Let me lift up. Now, my understanding of this question, and I hope the person that posed the question can confirm or deny otherwise, is asking whether or not we have programs or we would advocate that children actually participate in the programming that we do. As an example, coming out of that study that I told you about, we had set up what we have called the Champions of Change clubs. You remember I mentioned those clubs. And we recognize that for children or for anybody for which a program is developed, it doesn't make sense to just develop something and give them and say, hey, we've made this for you, you participate, you deal with it. But for success to really be, at the top levels, we need to have participations by the persons for whom the program itself is intended, because they can course correct. They can tell us this would not work for us. This would not work for us. For the Champions of Change clubs, we have what is set up called, it's a sort of government for the clubs themselves, where the children are the ones who decide, and they're actually part of a board. What are some of the activities that the club itself would be undertaken in their best interest? So we don't really decide, okay, you're going to do football, or you're going to do basketball, or you're going to do music. They themselves canvass other students to determine where there's high interest. And they've actually undergone some training, and you'll be surprised how much that they can do when we allow them the opportunity to do it. Strong leadership coming out from our kids in pulling together those responses and determining what activities will be undertaken, how the clubs themselves would be run. So I'm a really strong advocate for child participation or youth participation, particularly for programs that are developed in their interest. And we've actually seen it working with the Champions of Change clubs that we instituted last year.
Thank you, Sherwin. Heather, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I wasn't quite clear about the question, but if you're asking if we have a project for participation of children, that's a principle of our programming. So UNICEF really does not like to say we have a UNICEF program. We prefer to say governments and civil society organizations have programs which we support. And so one of the principles of support is trying also always to have the active participation, as Sharon said, of the beneficiaries, is their children directly, and to hear their voices, to hear their opinions, and to see how those opinions and those voices and can be reflected then in programming response.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions. Based on the move to have online learning on the forefront, what is the recommended approach to address the socialization aspect of children? This was made broadly, so any of you may answer it.
Okay, let me take a quick stab at it. From my understanding of the question, the respondent here is asking whether or not, even if the new normal is drifting towards online learning and persons sat in front of their systems interacting with society, where is the need for socialization? And I'm thinking that some of the ways, just quickly, when we look at, and I'm drawing back on the experiences from the study, and indirectly what a lot of it was supporting. A lot of resiliency is built in our young persons when they have strong participation of, and this is strong direct participation of their peers, their family, and their communities. Notwithstanding that the online learning or the lesson itself might involve electronic means, there should be opportunities provided, and I think we've done it somewhat in our SBAs within this region, for children to go out and interact and bring a personal touch to whatever it is they do. The interaction parents could possibly have, if you have students in a class, today, the 5 of us will meet by X's house and we do the lesson there. I mean, all social distancing and all of that, you know, being equal. Or tomorrow we go by this person's house and the parents will now be able to carpool or arrange to take their children to other spaces where they can learn and interact with other children in areas that they feel safe. So I think this is one of the areas that could be easily outlined. And even in a community setting, from time to time, even if you're doing lessons, children do need recreation. So if you have a program set up, say for instance, for sports, and again, all social distancing principles being equal, and we're looking towards the future, if you set up like a game day or something, so the children have online learning, but then they leave there, and then they just move naturally into a circumstance where they interact with their peers, and it's all part of the learning environment. So there's a way to marry the both of them. I think that the online participation enhances, but it does not take away the need for socialization.
I would just like to underscore what Sherwin has said. I do think, because I think this is a new frontier we're entering, I think in the post-COVID-19 era, I think online schooling and online working is going to be the new norm. And I think government has to take a hand, regional governments have to consciously structure our society where the younger generation does not find itself in a world of instant communication, being isolated and people shy, because this runs really contrary to our culture. And so I think regional governments will have to sit down and think of social events and plan community activity programs that children can be involved in. When I was going to school, there was the Duke of Edinburgh Award. There were a number of extracurricular activities. Our regional governments will have to invest in those extracurricular activities where young people can get together and express themselves and interact with each other, because it's a very different thing interacting online than it is interacting face to face. And if we're not careful, we will raise a generation of hermits, and we want to avoid that. So just to underscore what Sherwin has said, we do need programs, community type programs outside of school and work that will facilitate the interaction of young people.
Thank you very much, Carol. We have another question. Sherwin, you mentioned the importance of peer-to-peer support in your presentation. Have you identified any notable programs? Is that the Champion of Change Club? Grateful to have more information.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, the Champions of Change Club also has a component to facilitate peer-to-peer mentoring. Like I said, the persons that run the club, the board, are actually comprised of students. And of course, within any social space, there will be conflicts that arise. And so it also is incumbent upon the training that was done and for them to be able to know how to deal with those kinds of circumstances. We've had examples on various levels of the efficacy of persons being able to interact with their peers to solve disputes and problems. I think Trinidad has a program in the justice sector where the peers, students or children peers are able to listen to cases and be able to make determinations on what those are. So at every level, those things are incorporated. And yes, the Champions of Change Club, one of the principles that is in the operational activities of it, it does involve peer-to-peer mentorship.
Thank you, Sherwin. There were another couple of questions that have already been answered in the question and answer tool. I think thank you, Sherwin, they are telling you. Well, thank you to everyone. This would be the last intervention of this webinar. I hope that it was interesting for all of you. We are also working on a second webinar related to Caribbean issues. This time would be children and mental health. It would be carried on July the 2nd. We will also be sending you out all the information for you may register to this other webinar. And we also want to let you know that this was taped, so you will be able to share it with the people that you may consider opportune to share it with in the Facebook page of the IIN. So Julia, can you please just paste the link in the chat so everybody can have access to it. And we will also be sharing the presentation that both Heather and Sherwin shared this morning. Those will be available on the digital platform for the Caribbean states of the IIN. We will be sending you out also all this information. So many thanks for you all. And we hope that this was an interesting space. We will be closing this for all of you. Thank you very much and have a great day and a very good weekend since it's already Thursday. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, fellow participants.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Same to you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you to you all. Bye-bye.